Well, thanks everybody for joining. My name is Mike Raftery and I'm from SCM Connections. And today's topic for a webinar is one that gets a lot of interest, which is how to manage disruption in your supply chain with less disruption. And specifically, it addresses the scenario planning and optimization capabilities within IBP, SAP's next generation planning platform. And saying before, we always get a lot of takers for this because it is unfortunately or fortunately a common thing that happens in global supply chains, and it's happening with more frequency today. So what are we going to cover today? So I'll show you a little bit of an introduction overview, and then I'm not going to do a whole lot of sales stuff. This is again more of an educational webinar for everybody to learn what tools are out there and how they can manage scenarios and disruption easier. So we'll go through why IBP has some of these advantages and why it's different from previous generation applications. We're also going to go into what if simulation capabilities. So what capabilities do you actually have in the IBP platform to do scenario planning and what if planning? Then we're going to do simulations themselves with a live system demo. So I'm going to show a couple examples, tariffs being one. I'm going to show some unplanned capacity, downtimes being another. And we'll walk through what that looks like here in the future. So with that, hopefully everybody can hear. Everyone's good? All right. No comments. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So here's where we're at with the agenda. Like I said, we'll go through the introduction overview and some of the planning, what if simulations, and the live demos. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. So first of all, this is me. Hi. I actually grew my beard back since this picture, so I look a little different. But my name is Mike Raftery. I'm the CEO and partner at SCM Connections. We're exclusively a supply chain planning firm. We're an SAP partner. And personally, I've been involved in SAP planning applications for about 16 years, and IBP for about the last 5 since it came out. We pride ourselves on being supply chain consultants that happen to stumble into technology. So as you'll see here, it's more about solving the problems than just utilizing the technology. Why we like this platform in IBP is because it allows you to do a lot of different things that you were not able to do before, specifically run simulations and scenarios. And I've got a soapbox rant about what that, why that might be, and evolutions of technology, but maybe that's for a different webinar. But anyway, appreciate everybody showing up, taking time out of their busy days to hear me ramble on about scenario planning. So with that, let's get into it. So SCM Connections is a firm. If this is your first exposure to us, we are just supply chain nerds that love technology to solve the hardest problems out there. So we do gone above and beyond. We're a recognized expert in supply chain management by SAP, and a lot of that qualification is due to customer feedback, so we're pretty proud of that. We also have a partner package solution for IBP, so sort of a plug-and-play solution that's been SAP certified to work with your packages and with your platforms. Like I said, we are just supply chain nerds that love doing this stuff, and with that, let's go ahead and jump in. So today, this is overall the planning approach to planning with an IBP application. And so SAP has rolled out a new platform, probably about 2014 or so, although it's been gaining a lot of popularity lately. And this platform uses sort of an interconnected process. So what I want to take away from this slide here is that the IBP platform is a harmonized database that runs on the HANA server to run integrated plans, hence integrated in the name. So you'll get inventory, which will give you safety stock targets to mitigate against variability. There's a demand module to provide statistical forecasting. There's an s&op module that'll look for consensus building and decision making across the supply chain organization. Demand-driven replenishment, which is relatively new, pretty exciting, and we'll have a webinar on that very soon, which is more about providing buffers within your supply chain to eliminate some of the bullwhip effect. And then response and supply, which is network optimization capabilities. We got a series of webinars, tons of YouTube videos on all this stuff. But today in this one, we're going to focus on 2 in particular. One is the sales and operations planning module. And that one is going to focus on how you build consensus, do what if planning and scenarios across both demand and supply. And then for extra credit, we're going to look at the supply module as well, specifically the network optimization capabilities. So what we're going to do today is take a couple of disruptive activities. We're going to simulate some tariffs. We're going to simulate some maintenance issues. And then we're going to show you what that looks like with an optimization to give you best fit practices. So all this is wrapped around a HANA server, which is hosted in the cloud based in Excel, which is what we're going to look at here in a second. So a couple things about IBP which makes it really easy for these scenarios as a differentiator. First of all, first and foremost, it's on the cloud, so it's easily accessible, and the performance is exceedingly good compared to APO. I don't have any stats for that, and I probably should, but anecdotally, you can solve problems with the IBP servers for an optimization, for statistical forecasting, or inventory optimization at exponentially faster than you could with previous generation on-premise tools. It has all these algorithms, but the big ones I want to point out that matter for our particular experience today is this end-to-end data model, as well as a simulation of the supply chain, and those particularly work well for simulations. So with an end-to-end data model, what you can do, let's move down here, what you can do from an end-to-end data model is look for all of these elements together. So we have a customer, you have your distribution center, you have your plants, you might have a hub, you might also have your vendors and suppliers. And if these are all mapped together, there's no integration points. You're not doing interfaces, you're not doing extracts, you're not waiting for an overnight job. And what that means is that you can do a full simulation of your supply chain in sort of one activity, which allows you to get pricing information at the customer, cost information at the plant, lead time offsets throughout your supply chain, so you know exactly what that means in each scenario. If lead times change, how much inventory you're carrying. If demand changes, what does our profitability look like? Because you have customer pricing, you can get revenue. Because you have your supply chain costs, you can get costs. And if you combine the two, you get profitability. And what that really does is gives you the ability to move from what is, for the Gartner fans out there, from a stage 2 to a stage 3 maturity model. Stage 3 Gartner maturity model gives you, can you do this activity? So will it fit in your supply chain? Stage 3 would give you, or should we do it? So is it a profitable thing to be doing within your supply chain? And the fact that all these are in a single harmonized database is what I'm going to show you here in a second. But what that really does is unlock the ability to do what ifs and scenario planning and give intelligent answers to disruptive activities from an end-to-end supply chain. So it's going to do that with two ways. One is a scenario, and a scenario is very transactional based. You're thinking about things like changing your existing supply chain. So for example, what if demand goes up? What if capacity goes down? What if lead times change? What if costs change? Those are all scenarios, and those are going to be fairly quick hit in and out type of activities that IBP provides natively in its platform to support all these decision-making activities. Versions, on the other hand, are very master data heavy. So these would be problems to solve, such as, should we install another line? What happens if we get brand new product codes or bring on new vendors? Anything that requires new master data is in a version. So for today, we're going to focus on scenarios because most disruption happens in this scenario. So it's an unexpected activity, be that a cost, duration, or hurricanes, for example. Any of these things can be performed with scenarios. They're meant to be very quick hit, evaluative, and move from what used to be a very sort of tribal knowledge, gut instinct reaction to a very planful, data-driven decision-making process. And that's what we'll show today. I'm going to show you some to show that they are all able to be created and changed on the fly, and versions will be also user-driven. So they both exist. So with that, that's about the quickest version we can get into, and that's mostly because I really don't like doing these with PowerPoint, but I think it helped to sort of set the stage as to what we're going to see. So today we're going to see a flexible planning network with redundant options. That's a fairly common supply chain platform today, just because you need to have that flexibility built in to hedge against variability. Global networks especially have multiple options with different costs and different parameters that you can supply, that you can meet your demand with. We're going to show cost changes and equipment failures that I talked about. We'll simulate in real time and show them side by side. So what I've done is created this network that we'll review today. And this network is based in the US. And what I'm going to show is basically, what happens if you have tariffs into Boston for whatever reason. We'll call it a Boston Tea Party equivalent, for lack of a real world example. I think time has passed enough that's fairly not controversial, a tariff, unless of course you're in the UK. So this is what we're going to look at. And what I want to show is that we have customers that are sourced from different distribution centers. But really, what I want to look for is all of these have multiple redundant sourcing options. And what does that look like? So with that, let's get out a PowerPoint here and get into the system. So for those that haven't seen it, IBP as a platform should look very familiar. And the reason it should look very familiar is because you have Excel, right? This is Excel. Look, I'm showing you right here. This is your standard issue toolbar. This is your formatting options. These are the ribbon that everybody has. I think this is 2019 even. And when you get IBP, what you're doing is you're actually installing an add-in, and that gives you this ribbon up top. Now, what you'll notice about the IBP platform is that there is no menu tree, there's no transaction codes. For those that are used to previous SAP tools, there's no blue, what do they call that? SAP gray and blue color scheme. You're not doing /n transaction codes or MD04, speaking some foreign language. You're all looking at pretty clear established icons, and the data itself is below. So that means that it'll be really easy to look through to understand, and it actually helps with user adoption quite a bit. So what are we going to do today? We're going to look through a supply chain as it exists. And let me just refresh this here and throw some disruption at it to see what happens. So what I've done with my model, and I guess we're coming to the end of summer, we should change out our model, but throughout the summer when we were doing IBP demonstrations for scenarios, we had barbecues on the mind, so we had products, pork, sausage, bratwurst, beef, hot dogs, etc. Now, I'll just close that. So what I'm going to show here is our entire supply chain across the bottom. So what I've done is created a supply chain flow with tabs in Excel that maybe a supply planner would do, okay? So this supply planner would look at demand. They'd look for transportation. So for example, this is how you're supplying customers from a volume point of view. Then you might look for production. You might look at capacity. And lastly, inventory. Okay. So what we're going to do is first establish our baseline supply chain. So in our baseline supply chain right now, I'm looking at product level, customer description, and the consensus demand. But maybe this is too detailed a level for what I'm looking for. And so one of the features that's really nice about IBP when you're trying to manage a large amount of data or manage data quickly is the ability to aggregate and disaggregate. So for example, instead of individual product items, which is what I have here, I want to go to a product family. And so to do that, this is something a planner can do. They can come in here and edit the views as they see fit. They can edit time periods, so they could show it by month. So let's go ahead and show it by month just for fun. I said I want to look at the family level, so I'm going to remove product description from my hierarchy and put in product family. It's self-filtering, it's all in English, easy to use. I'm going to keep the key figures that I have in place. So this is the data that I'm showing. I'm not going to change those. We're going to leave it in US dollars and eaches just for fun. I'm going to keep my existing filter right here. So it's going to say, just show these products and these customers. And when I click OK, what it's going to do is it's reaching out to that HANA server on the SAP's cloud, which is hosted by SAP, asking for the query I've provided, and then refreshing my Excel sheet with what I've requested, which is exactly what we went through. Monthly buckets, customer description, product family. Okay. Now you can modify data because it's in Excel very quickly and very easily. And to show that, it's still Excel, right? I mean, these are still formulas. You can still see numbers in a bucket, for example, here. So if, for example, you wanted to change this demand and say, I just got a call from my customer in Anaheim. whatever, because of the World Series play or the baseball playoffs coming on, we're going to increase this by 10%. So I'm just going to say equals what I had before, multiplied by 1.15. We'll say it's increasing 50%. And I'm using Excel, right? It's still Excel. Push enter. It's going to change this cell, color code it that it's been changed. And then I'm going to say that's going to go for a full quarter. So I'm going to copy that across for 3 months. You can see here my demand has changed. It's green, which means it's changed locally, but it's not changed in the cloud yet. And I'm going to save that. So that's how easy it is to change data. Very easy to work with, very easy to simulate it. And it's this sort of capability that will provide for our scenarios. So there you go. So I'm going to go ahead and run this now, just to establish a baseline for us. So I'm going to go to run. And again, there's no transaction codes. There's no /n or /o or /SAP APO. You're just saying I'm going to run an s&op operator or a function on my centralized data. So it's checking all of my tabs. It's saying, what do you want to run? I want to run here, and I want to run this optimizer. So I'm going to run it. Now, all it's going to do is meet the demand that I have out here. Now, as you look through it, I'm going to let that run for a second. We'll show, for example, my capacity. Now, what I've done with my capacity is I've said, in this case, as it's refreshing my tab, that I have cost differentials. So to make it easier, the resource that's 1010 is the cheapest resource I have in my network. 1310 is second cheapest, and 1710 is the most expensive, although it has the most capacity. And for those that aren't familiar with an optimizer, it uses cost to evaluate different alternatives and gives you the least costly item to meet your customer demand. In which case you'll see here is this capacity utilization. If you look on the bottom, what resources does it fill up first? Of course, it fills up the cheapest resources first, right? Because the optimizer is looking for the least cost option. We have these two at 100%. My most costly option is at, it fluctuates. And in this case, you might even say, look, I don't even want to run this. So that's a scenario we can run to. All right, let's do some disruption. So I think my solve is done. We have a baseline. I'm going to check the status. Complete. Refresh. So what should we do first? Johanna, do you want tariffs or do you want just capacity downtime? Capacity downtime. All right. So that's what we're going to do. So what we're going to do in this one is to say, well, what happens? Obviously, it's filling up these cheap resources. If you get a call and say, look, you know what? For the first 8 weeks of 2020, we need to shut down this resource because we have a capital project that needs to happen. We're changing out equipment, we're upgrading equipment. So let's say not only are we going to change the equipment, but we're going to gain capacity from it. So I'm going to be down for 8 weeks, and after that, it's going to be 50% more efficient. Okay, that seems like a decent trade-off. So what does that mean to my supply chain? So if you're getting that disruptive call, you come in and say, well, I'm just going to remove capacity for the 8 weeks of downtime that I was told. Delete. I'm going to say now this is 50% more capacity. So it's gone from 2,000 to 3,000. I'm going to drag that across the horizon over here. All the way out. Sorry, I probably should have shortened the horizon. Here we go. I'm going out 2 years. All right, so there's the change. Now, instead of saving it, I don't know that I want to save this yet, right? So I'm going to create one of those scenarios that I described. So this is something a planner would do, is say, look, I don't want to change the main plan, but I want to create a what if. So I'm going to create this scenario and say, name this 1010 maintenance upgrade. So 8 week downtime on 1010. I'm going to say okay. So what this is going to do is create another column in here for scenarios that's going to tell you that it's not your quote unquote active scenario, but it's actually simulation or scenario. So this is something that you haven't committed to yet. You're just saying, you know, how is this actually going to work? So come in here. And the reason you'll know is because it's creating a column called maintenance upgrade. And in this maintenance upgrade, you'll see it has my downtime and it has my increased capacity. So what does that do to my network? Well, I'm not going to guess. I'm going to run it. So I'm going to run that operator. And I'm going to run it just on the scenario. So you can run it on the scenario itself. So what I've done, in essence, is created a parallel supply chain plan from the normal operating plan. And you can optimize that plan, and that's going to do everything from transportation projections. It's going to show you customer shortfalls if we can't meet the demand. It's going to show you capacity requirements. It's going to show you component requirements. So it's going to show you all of these elements, not just the capacity impact, but transportation, components, customer impact, DC flow, inventory carrying cost. Every node from start to finish along your supply chain is going to show that impact because IBP creates that interconnected supply chain plan all at once. So while that's running, I'm going to show you something even better, is that you can compare these side by side. So this is not something you have to do a VLOOKUP for. This isn't something you have to pull out to a different tool. I'm going to come into my scenario and say, I want to see this one and I want to compare it to the baseline. So now I'm viewing two scenarios, and what it's going to do is create a second set of rows that indicate what is my original plan and what is my maintenance downtime. And as it's pulling it back up, it can actually contain multiple plans at once. Now, I didn't need IT to do this. We didn't need any batch jobs to do this. This is something planners can do as part of their daily job. You can see here, it does not use that capacity here. But what has changed? Well, what's changed is this 1700 resource. Oops, let me come back. Is utilized at a higher rate, as you would expect, because it has to absorb all this capacity. So if it comes back to say, well, it can't happen, great. It looks like it can happen, and it works out well. What you can also do is see some of the impacts to that. Now, because you've changed the location of production, what else are you going to change? Well, the transportation's changed. So you can say, well, that's fine, but can we support that from a shipment point of view? So basically, do I have transportation available to support this, not just capacity? Let me zoom out here a little bit. And this is one of my favorite things about playing with the optimizer is you get to see all the ripple effects that occur. Okay. So if you're looking here, you're looking to say, well, where does the volume change? So where is it shifted? And if you're looking at it, it's really from this one to this one. So if you're looking at the two scenarios on this lane, so what we'll do is say, show me two scenarios. So I'm going to just show it graphically so it's easy to show. So two different scenarios between Seattle and Chicago. Let me kill that filter and increase this here. And because it's Excel, you can do things like change the chart type to show you just a line graph. And all pretty easy to work with. There's probably some large spikes at the end. Yeah, there we go. So what you can see is the different transportation methods. And you know what? I just want to see a total. So rather than sum it up, you can actually come in here and say, well, show me what the first quarter in 2020 looks like, either from a quarter view, so quarter 1, 2020, maybe just 2. Right, so now you know that it's impacting that first quarter. What does it actually do on a quarter by quarter basis? And you can see it right here, side by side. It looks to have doubled. Quarter 2 comes back to normal. And it looks like in here, the Philadelphia plant to Seattle is what, about a third? And it comes back to normal. So this is then actionable information, and that's that next level information. So not just can we do it from a capacity point of view, but also what is it actually doing to my overall supply chain? Not just the capacity, what I changed, but also the transportation impact. You can see here, Chicago to DC is increased by, what, a third? And Chicago to Detroit's up just a little bit. So you can see right away, now you can have actionable information from start to finish that go and help you understand everybody's impact. So you're not reacting. You're not making these decisions in a vacuum. You're actually evaluating it side by side and informing people what the impacts will be to see if it's feasible from start to finish. Pretty cool stuff. Now what are we going to do? So that's a capacity plan. We've said, well, can we handle it? Yeah, as long as I can handle transportation. Great. What you can do then is in this scenario, say if you want to adopt it, you can come in here and manage the scenario and actually promote it and say, we're going to use that and apply the changes. So you can actually apply them without having to copy anything. Also pretty cool. So now what I'm going to do is one more scenario for you, which is showing cost-based optimization. So I'm going to come in here and come back to my baseline. And I'm going to go to my transportation optimization costs. So let's come in here and say location, and this is ship to description. There we go. And say okay. So now what we're going to simulate is what happens if we end up with tariffs. So I mentioned that everything into Boston is now taxed. Why not? Again, trying to stay away from political implications. So I'm going to come over here to my transportation optimization costs, and it's going to pull up the cost rates for these scenarios. So now I'm going to say, look, all of my elements to my supply chain are the same, but what happens if my cost structure changes? What happens, you know, this applies for raw material cost changes. Price of steel goes up, price of sugar goes up. What happens if you have all of a sudden, you know, a frost and your orange juice crop is gone? I mean, those are the kind of things that you can look for. So what we'll do is say everything into Boston is going to be now 10 times everybody else's cost. Or, you know what, let's do out of San Jose, just to make it easier. So I'm going to say everything out of San Jose. Sorry, I'm changing my scenario, but it's just going to be easier if I do everything from a specific location. So let's call it a carbon tax and say everything out of San Jose is now 10 times as expensive to ship than anywhere else in the country. Okay. So I'm going to take that cost and I'm going to apply it across the horizon to say now my shipping costs have changed. This can happen due to fuel surcharges or carrier limitations or, you know, anything. I mean, everybody has about 10 that are popping into your head right now. Now, again, instead of saving that to the main scenario, you're saying, well, what happens? I just got a call. This tariff might come in. It's going to cost me a lot more to ship out of San Jose. What is that actually going to do to my overall supply chain? Well, I'm going to go in here and create a scenario. And this one's going to say San Jose transportation increase. I'm going to do that. Jim and I are going to work on it, so you can actually share these scenarios with other users if you're working on a sub-team. Not everybody needs to see them. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. It's going to create that scenario just like you saw before. And it's going to show you that extra column, which will indicate that it's actually a scenario that you're viewing, not the live data. All right, so there's your increase. I'm going to go ahead and run that. So I'm going to run San Jose in my demo environment, and we're going to run the optimizer again. So while that's running, let's see what that does to our overall plant capacity. So I'm going to come back to my capacity tab, and you'll notice, and maybe I'm taking it for granted, but it's actually showing these sort of side by side. So I'm working back and forth in my supply chain tabs on the bottom, from customer demand all the way through to capacity. So I'm going to bring up the baseline so we have a comparison point to say what is it different from today. So again, nothing has changed in the overall network or the capacity or even the volume. It's all cost-based. And what an optimizer does is it looks for the least cost solution. So what it's doing right now is it's evaluating the difference between actually producing more. So actually, given that it costs more to ship out of San Jose, do I build more in the future and carry that inventory longer? Okay, so it's balancing inventory holding cost against transportation costs, which is significantly increased. And what you'll see here is it basically, if this is the San Jose facility, which it is, it has prevented any production at that facility. If you look at the two different lines, right, you now see it's gone from 100% utilized at the 1310 facility to 0. It said, you know what, it's not worth producing at that plant at all. That transportation impact is so great that, you know what, not only do we not need it, we still have capacity to handle it. So the capacity at the 1710 facility can still handle all the volume, and we avoid that cost. You can see what that does from transportation. I'm sure it's significant, right? So now you're looking at not just what does it do from the production side, but you know it's going to change it. Well, how much, right? Let's go and evaluate 2020. So if you're looking at 2020 carrier volumes, for example, you can say I'm going to look for 4 periods, and I want to see the total as well. And say okay. So what do you show? You're looking at the volumes that went down. You can see it's actually still making some out in Q4. So it does need it for a while, but not for 3 quarters. And you're looking at the volume changes, right? So if you're shipping from, say, Philadelphia to Detroit, you're up, what, 25%? However, if you're going from Chicago to Detroit, now you're up quite a bit more than that, maybe a third, maybe a little bit more, okay? Significant volume increase for 2020. Then you start saying, can we handle it? Do we need to look at rail options? Do we need to look at other carrier options? Do we need to look at different sourcing? Those are the type of evaluations you can do. Now, the most important part would be, can we actually meet this customer demand? And again, because I just want to see the sum total of what we're looking at here, I'm going to shrink this view. And I want to just see the total. So for example, how does it impact my customers? So I want to show total in periods. And I don't really care about products. I just want to know what customers I need to go talk to. So we're just going to do by customer. Oops. So what it's doing right now is it's recalculating the aggregation levels. I'm still month over month. If we go out to the far right here, you can see, is there any change in the total demand that I've met? And right now you can see that the customer receipts are about the same. There's a little bit less customer receipts in Phoenix. Actually a little more in New Jersey. So the overall customer impact is minimal, which is great. I don't have to apologize. Our top line revenue is probably fine. But what does that do to my cost? Well, I have created a tab I call finance, just for lack of a better term, that's going to show us what our cost would have been. So what is our projected stock value? What's our revenue going to be? Okay. So you can see with this one, we're actually carrying less inventory, but what happened? My production costs went up. Now, why did my production costs go up? My production costs went up because if you went to the capacity, right, you remember what I said, 1310 is the second most expensive plant and 1710 is the most expensive plant. It's using a lot more capacity of that expensive resource, that 1710. So what did that do to my overall plan? It increased my production value. So how much? Well, because it's Excel, you can do this, right? You can use Excel to do Excel type things. Say, how much did it actually change? What is that, 2%? There you go. These are the type of on-the-fly evaluations that would take a really long time to do in tools that require integration. So if I had to export this and import it, I'd still be waiting on the export. I wouldn't even be able to do this level of evaluation. The next part is, where am I actually storing this material? Can we actually store it? What's my average projected stock value? How much am I carrying at these facilities? So if the next element is then, I want to see, because I look at warehouses, where am I keeping this inventory and how much, right? Again, we looked at customer, we looked at transportation, we looked at capacity. Now we're looking at storage. And I'm going to look at, let's play at different aggregation levels. I'm going to look at location type. Yeah, that's really all I care about. So let's see what we're keeping at the location type. And we're going to see that for month. For the next 12 months. And I also want to see a total. No, I'm not going to see a total. Let's just look month by month. So now what it's doing is it's looking at the different inventory levels and the average stock value. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say, first of all, let's look at the stock value between the two. I'm going to create a series. I'm going to just create a bar chart today. And let's look at DCs. So what I'm looking at right now is the average projected stock value at the DC with this new scenario. And you can see there are some elements where it's significantly higher. What is blue is the increase, right? So towards the end of 2020, right, there's not a lot of impact, but right here there's a huge amount of impact. So there's a lot of pre-build taking place in this August-September timeframe. And you can see where that shows up, not just in the projected stock, but also in the value that you're carrying. So you need to carry a lot more inventory as well. The inventory targets aren't changing. The plants themselves also have to carry more inventory and more quantity. So from here, you can get a top line value to say, what is the impact to the overall supply chain and how does that feed into different cost considerations? So now we're looking at not just can we handle it from a capacity point of view. I think we've proved that we can, but where is it also showing up? It's a storage impact. It's a transportation impact. All these secondary elements that are difficult to extrapolate if you're doing back of the napkin calculations are in real time and in a cost optimized scenario with this optimizer. So the optimizer is natively baked within the IBP application. It allows you to see different elements side by side. We can evaluate it both in costs, valuation, as well as units. So you can see it in dollars, and we can aggregate in any level we wanted to. We also were able to show it in quarters, months, weeks, as well as totals, and the impact on every element along the way. Okay. Even DC to customer. Are there any impacts to where we ship if we're shipping from different customers? So all these elements combined allow for really flexible planning, and anything that has a cost implication you can do, whether that is storage cost, whether that is transportation cost, whether that is availability of a constraint. Maybe you have a raw material shortage. You can simulate those as well. So these are all the elements that you can view side by side to show what those elements would be. So that's sort of the summary. There's also a website to this, which I can show, which is really helpful to show visualization of the network. So here's what we saw. Here's the different sourcing options. So we have a flexible supply chain for this product. Where is that inventory kept? And these scenarios that I showed you also are available to view within this network as well. So if you're looking at different demand quantities or what have you. So that's where I want to leave about 15 minutes for questions in case anybody had questions in terms of how you can evaluate a dynamic network and how you can simulate disruptions quickly, easily, and efficiently. Now, what you do with this information, I showed that you can actually publish it out. So you can actually promote that scenario. Say, we're going to actually do this thing, right? So we're going to promote that scenario to the production environment, or we're going to delete it and never speak of it again. And those are the type of elements that are very quick. So these are type of decisions that are made sort of within the meeting itself. These are working sessions you can do with colleagues. These are elements you can see with your teammates and actually work side by side and not guess and not have them done in a vacuum, okay? So a couple quick things here to wrap up the presentation part, and then we'll go ahead and open up for Q&A. So that was our network that we showed. I varied a little bit, that's okay. A couple elements, again, from SCM Connections point of view. This type of package we promote as what's called SPARK, SCM Planning Accelerator Resource Kit. This type of planning platform that I'm showing now, in terms of configuration, dashboards, templates, training, and even some nice Java-enabled dashboards, are a fixed cost, fixed scope, and fixed duration. So it takes all of the risk off of you and puts it back on us. And it looks very similar to what I showed today, although it has a little bit more features than this one. It's a partner package solution, which means SAP has signed off on it, the configuration, the design, and the training. So this isn't just something we came up with off the fly. This is something SAP has said this is a qualified partner package solution ready to go for anybody that wants to use it. A couple other plugs for us. If you want to learn more, we have an IBP Workshop in downtown Chicago. This is an in-person event. So this is going to take place Friday, October 18th, all day. It's at our offices at 500 West Madison, which is the Ogilvy train station for those that are in Chicago. It's going to show accelerated roadmap items for IBP. It's going to show next generation integrated planning from end to end. It's going to show a roadmap as well. Basically all the advanced features that you may have missed the first time around if you're already an IBP customer. Really helpful. We're really excited for this workshop. We're seeing a lot of enthusiasm for it. Really, anybody that has seen IBP before wants to get that next level, sort of 200 level class, that's what that is. If you want to see us in person, we're going to be at the IBF Forecasting and S&op Conference in Orlando, Florida, October 20th to 23rd. And then the Insider Intelligent Customer Experience Driven Supply Chain Conference, which is a mouthful. That's going to be down in Orlando as well in early November. So you can stop by our booth and get live demos or just say hi. We have a couple of presentations. I think we have 4 presentations there to find us. So that's about where to find us. Are there any questions from anybody on the platform, or if you want to see something different, or if there's something you wanted to see that you didn't, be more than happy to show that right now. So we will have these out after the workshop. We're also going to publish this as a video recording as well. So one question that we have is around the master data required for this. So is this master data required in ECC, or can you create it on the fly? And that's a good question for simulations. So the data that I'm showing is data that you would generally find from your source system, whether that's an ECC or any other ERP system for that matter. But the maintenance of it can take place directly in IBP. So if I open up, for example, my master data workbook here, and I'm going to filter down to finished goods, what I can show you is, say, let's look at location products. So this would be like a location product table that you're bringing in. So this data set might be something that you get integrated from your source system, but I mentioned before, coming back to this slide here, that versions are different master data elements. So for example, if you needed to extend a product group to a different family, or if you had products that were approved in a different market, you would not have to wait for your source system to be updated. Okay. If you're adding master data, you can see this is the base version, but if you created another version, you might come in and say, well, what happens if I extend that? And to change data in a version is as easy as copy, paste, oops, paste, and maybe I create a new location A. Okay, you go ahead and save that, and now you'd have master data extended. This is another real nice advantage of IBP. While it does integrate with other source systems, you can actually create your own data on the fly for simulations, new product lines, new locations, new resources, those kind of things. You can also change master data very easily. So for example, is there a lead time? Let's just say I want to change this from 1 to 2. So again, you're doing another version change. You can go ahead and just double click and it changes because it's Excel, right? So you get the benefits of Excel. Pretty easy to work with. So a good question on the master data and how that works. Any other questions in the group?
In your example, transportation costs were displayed as rates. Can you show them as?
So the question is, in my example, the transportation costs were shown as rates, and really it's a cost element. Can I show them, what was it?
Actuals.
As actuals. Okay, that's a good example.
And instead of percentages, increase as actuals.
Sure. So questions were, how do I actually increase it? So even though it doesn't look like it, this cost rate, because this is a demo system, is currency, and I hesitate to use currency because for an optimizer, it doesn't necessarily have to use the actuals, but it really does help if you do. So we've seen customers where they will go to extremes to roll up actual costs. They might do fuel mileage or carrier rates, or I mean, all kinds of crazy elements of cost and roll them up into this element. So depending on your supply chain inputs, you can definitely take actuals and integrate them in. Then you can take those actuals and change them. So for example, if you said, you know, what if fuel rates go up next year? You can go ahead and simulate that, even if the actuals are brought in from a source system. So hopefully that answers that question. The other thing I mentioned was the percentages, right? So I showed the percent change, I think it was demand that I showed. You can absolutely change actuals. So if I'm gonna say, you know, just type in 1,000, right, drag that across, save, and you can change actuals as well. I just showed the percentages because I like to demonstrate that all of your native Excel capabilities still exist here. So that's a pretty neat feature. I'm not going to save it, but if it's saved, if I push save, it would. Another question?
Relating to a scenario, is data saved and the scenario remains static? If yes, can support purpose of snapshotting the data?
Is data saved in a scenario static, and can it snapshot the data? The answer is not really. So from a technical point of view, when I did that scenario, let me think about how to answer that. Let me contrast that with a version. When you do a version, you're actually doing a complete copy of that plan. So when I create a version, for example here, if I go to manage versions, sorry, blinking through all the tabs I have here. And if I'm copying from base to lead time, for example, and I copy all these key figures, it's going to copy all those verbatim over to the new version. If I do a scenario, for example, I did a scenario just on those data elements, it only saves the data elements that are changed. It doesn't make an entire database copy. So if things change in baseline, it could change in your scenario except for elements that change. The question is, can we use them for snapshots? The answer is, I mean, theoretically, you probably could, but I would not recommend it. There are snapshot capabilities within IBP that you can use for snapshot key figures is what they're called. And I would recommend using that functionality rather than a scenario. A scenario I would limit more to sort of working copies, what if kind of whiteboard type activities, not for data repositories. In my experience, that's a best case to do it. If you do want snapshots of certain key figures, then I would create them as snapshot key figures or use an external reporting tool. Any other questions we got? No? Good? Awesome. Well, in that case, I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy schedules on a Thursday to hang out with us for an hour and learn about how IBP manages disruptions. My contact information is right here. You can see my email. You can see the SCM Connections website. Please, we use our LinkedIn page as a hub for more info and for workshop registrations that I mentioned on the 18th in downtown Chicago. Visit our website, visit our LinkedIn page for more context, and our YouTube page, for example, because we post these videos as well as a ton of 5-minute features, which give you insights into one capability at a time in IBP, webinars, demos, whatever you need. LinkedIn and YouTube are our central hubs for disseminating information. We love working with our clients. We love working with their supply chain. So if there's any questions you might have in the future or today, please do not hesitate to reach out. We're easy to work with. Your friendly neighborhood supply chain consultants. And with that, everybody enjoy your Thursday and have a great run up to your weekend. Thanks again.